So we've got about 15 minutes now to sort of just any final questions for Tony. So I know from group 1, we've got a question from Kelly. So Kelly from Janet's group, did you have a question?
So we'd like to know, ideally, especially in relation to the 2016 study that you mentioned, what were the main objections, who was objecting, and is it also typical that those kind of planning processes take that long, or is that kind of a very special case?
So none of those areas are my particular speciality, but I'll hazard a guess, if you like. The main concerns about wind turbines are noise. There are other concerns around flicker, which is where the sun shines through the blades and produces a what you can imagine is a disturbing visual effect. There are, of course, overall visual impact concerns that people express. So I think it's likely that any wind farm that's visible from the national park is potentially likely to be objected to, for example.
Yeah, just to add,
and as most places in Devon are visible from Dartmoor, that's a bit of a challenge.
Just to add that we will have presentations on Saturday about some of the sort of landscape and visual effects, and we'll also be having the presentation around sort of planning and planning powers. So hopefully our speaker there, who you'll also have the opportunity to ask questions of, might have a bit more sort of knowledge about the sort of typical, sort of planning lengths of time and objections, and I'll make sure I flag that to them.
Absolutely. But the case study at Denbrook is quite well known. The BBC made a series of programs about it.
Okay, now I've got a bit of a list of questions building up here. So I'm going to come to Doreen now, who was in group 3 with Carrie.
Awesome. Hi, Tony. Could you tell me the lifespan of a turbine, sort of the approximate lifespan of a turbine, and when they have reached that time, how they're disposed of?
Right. Typically, a wind turbine is going to last about 20 years. That's the sort of those percent of carbon payback percentages were based on 20-year lives. Now turbines can be repowered, so replaced with other turbines once the initial turbine is worn out, if you like. The disposal process is not something I'm particularly familiar with, but would involve taking down the tower, taking the blades off initially, taking the turbine hub down, so the bit that generates electricity, and then removing the tower. And those parts would presumably, I'm assuming here, be recycled where possible. Then the site abandoned if the wind farm was not being used anymore, or a new turbine put up in its place. And that has happened in sites in the southwest.
We can try and find out a little more about disposal and bring that back at some other point. It's not currently something that I'm aware someone's going to be talking about, but we could dig into a bit more of that if people are interested. Caroline, I know you've got your hand up. Was that sort of following up on that same question, or you're muted at the moment? But so I do have a list of questions, but if it was a clarification, I'll follow up.
No, just quickly, what the payback time on the investment be, kind of followed in from that question.
Yeah, that's a good question. I need to do some work on that one. I would be guessing, and it will vary clearly depending on the site, the wind speed. So that's a project by project answer. But a typical payback for onshore wind, yeah, I wouldn't hazard a guess at that one.
Thank you.
Okay, we had a question lined up from Claire, I think, in group 2.
Hi Tony, this may also be a better question for the planning person in the future, but just we were interested really in the extent to which the kind of the planning officials, the planning structure is kind of educated and aware of the wider context around the need for wind energy, and also the kind of information that has to be provided to object, whether that's kind of rational and scientific.
I think the planning session would be the best place to ask that question. I mean, I have had some personal experience of planning inquiries, and my general experience of planning inspectors is that they are incredibly good. Of course, they are constrained in what they can do by the planning guidance that they're working with.
Yeah. And we'll definitely talk a lot more about that on Saturday, and there's definitely space built in to ask any additional questions that aren't covered. Thanks, Claire. Mark from group 3, did you have a question?
Yeah, we talked about renewables, and you talked about how they flatlined since 2016, and obviously some of the difficulties that involved in getting planning permission and such forth has put some developers off. But what were the other reasons? We wonder whether there was any government subsidies that had changed or government policy changes.
Well, again, I think these will be covered later in the week, but yes, in 2015, David Cameron, as part of a manifesto pledge, said he would stop onshore wind development, essentially, and that then came to pass. So the National Planning Policy Framework was updated with details that essentially meant that onshore wind development can't really take place. Yes, that has been a block, and the current Prime Minister has said that he plans to change that. We'll see.
And I think that's why it's one of the reasons that there's some plans to potentially change some of this planning legislation at the moment, is one of the reasons why this topic has been identified for the Assembly.
But equally, I would argue that even before that, the lessons from Denbrook and other planning applications across the county, the developers were finding it very difficult to justify the pre-development expenditures, given the risks that they saw in actually getting a wind farm off the ground.
Okay, we've got a few more questions lined up here. So is it Selena, I think, from group 1? You had a question.
Yeah, my question's already been partially answered to some extent, but I was again wondering, since the 2016 study, it took 12 years, which seems to not be a usual amount of time, but still I was wondering, because of the flat line now, is that because of the fact that there is in production things happening, or is there nothing really happening right now that you know of?
There's nothing happening right now, according to the UK Wind Energy Database.
Okay, thank you. John, I think you've got a question from group 3.
Yes, I'd like to know if there's a kind of a different design or shape that can be used in cities, which may be able to direct wind, which wouldn't be so large.
We went through a phase perhaps 10 years ago where we started to see relatively small helical, so vertical axis wind turbines appearing. But I think the evidence suggests that we haven't seen them deployed very widely, that they're not particularly effective. So horizontal axis, large scale wind turbines, we know are effective.
Okay, thank you. And Ryan from group 2, I think you had one lined up too.
Yes, I did. It was it was asking about when they make complaint, the common thing I hear about wind turbines is their noisiness. We don't have any here, and I've never been pleasant, but whenever I've seen any videos of people working near them or showing the birds striking or birds flying through them, around them, I've never heard any noise in any videos. Is it a subsonic thing, or is it not a problem as much with modern wind farms?
Well, I mean, I've been up to Fullerbrook Down in North Devon, and when you're close to the turbines, there's definitely a blade swoosh as they move through the air. So they do make noise. There's no doubt about it, and hence why the 400-meter distance from dwellings is set. Of course, noise is a funny thing, isn't it? And yeah, there's quite a lot of behavioral science around what's an irritating noise and why some people could live next to a wind farm and find it not disturbing, and why other people can find it very disturbing. So that's not my area of expertise, but it is the case.
And again, we're going to hear a bit more from sort of residents who are living, or a resident who sort of representing their community who are living near wind farms, that may give us a bit more insight into how that affects some people rather than, more so than others. Okay, we've got, is there any final questions for, we've probably got time for like one or maybe two more questions if there was something burning that your group didn't get a chance to ask. Caroline, I can see your hands popped up, so over to you.
Hi there. Yeah, you've mentioned that you don't have it near domestic buildings of 400 meters, but and I know it does happen at places in the UK, so why can't we put it on industrial estates or something like that, which no one would have any objections to, or less objections?
Well, I mean, that is an interesting question, and there are some wind turbines that I've seen in the UK, but much more so on the continent, in industrial areas. So yeah, I mean, the restriction is around dwellings. So yeah, it should be possible to locate wind turbines in areas if they don't disturb people, and of course that's all part of the planning process for people to take a view as to whether they feel they're going to be disturbed or their business premises are going to be disturbed, and participate in the planning process to make those views known.
Okay. Any other sort of burning ones, Tony? We've probably got about 1 or 2 minutes if there is something. Otherwise,
just ask, is there a maximum speed of wind speed that will stop these things, or is there a way of controlling them? Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Wind turbines have both a minimum and maximum wind speed cutoff, so they won't try and operate when the wind's not enough, and they will cut off when the wind speed gets too high.
Right. Do they have to break them then?
Yes. They will. Again, I'm not a technical wind specialist. If you've got a developer, then these are questions to ask them. But there are ways of feathering the blades to stop them catching the wind, so they don't break them as such, but they alter the blade angles to depower the turbine essentially.
Okay. Thank you.
okay. Thank you, Tony. Look, really glad you're able to come in and join us today. Hopefully you've enjoyed the questions and the conversation, and I think you've given the members a lot of food for thought and stuff that's definitely going to help underpin some of the considerations as we move forward. We've got sort of some baseline stuff now. We've got some of the sort of broad facts around what wind turbines can do, what are some of the restrictions, where can they sort of be located or not located, the constraints on that. when we come back on Saturday, we're going to be looking a bit more at, different arguments for why or why not they might be a good idea in Devon. So thank you again, Tony.
You're welcome.
Okay, so again, thank you to members.